Commentary.
Okay, so let's start with a feeling that I think is pretty universal at this point.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter if you wear a red hat, a blue hat, or, if you threw your hat in the trash years ago. When you look at the political career of Donald Trump, specifically his time in the White House, there is this lingering sense of just being kind of dumbfounded.
It's the defining reaction, isn't it? I mean, for a huge portion of the world, watching his presidency felt like watching a movie where the plot twists just didn't make any sense.
Right.
You'd wake up, check the news, and see a decision or a statement that seemed to completely contradict what happened the day before.
It feels impulsive, it feels chaotic, and usually the analysis just kind of stops right there. We say, well, he's just unpredictable, and we move on.
Exactly.
But today, we are doing something a bit different. We're doing a deep dive into a stack of research that claims we've been looking at this all wrong.
Yeah, totally wrong.
The argument in our source material today is that what looks like total chaos to the outside world is actually a highly structured, repetitive internal code.
That's the core thesis here. And it's fascinating because we tend to overanalyze politicians, right? We look for these complex 4D chess moves or hidden agendas or some grand ideological strategy.
Yeah, the secret master plan.
Right. But this research argues that with Trump, you aren't really seeing a political strategy in the traditional sense. You are seeing a psychological operating system.
Which is such a great way to frame it and just set the tone for you listening. We aren't judging the policies today. We aren't asking if the car is driving to a good place or a bad place.
No, not at all.
We're just popping the hood to see how the engine actually works, impartially looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. And the argument is that if you understand the mechanics of this engine, the car stops looking like it's swerving randomly. It's actually driving a very specific route.
Driven by 3 specific traits.
Right. The research breaks this down into 3 distinct behavioral traits. His speed regarding policy, his absolute need for an opponent, and a deep-seated aversion to weakness.
Okay, let's start with the first one, because this is the one that I think gave foreign leaders actual whiplash.
Oh, absolutely.
The trait is speed over deliberation.
Or as the source text calls it, the logic of reversals.
The logic of reversals, this is that phenomenon where he says something on Monday, reverses it on Tuesday, and maybe, I don't know, reverses it back on Friday.
Yeah, and to the average voter or even a seasoned journalist, this looks like confusion. It looks like he doesn't know what he wants.
But the source argues it's not confusion.
No, it's actually a carryover from his previous life. You have to remember, for decades, this man operated in high-stakes real estate and branding.
Right, the business world.
And in that world, what is the most valuable asset you have?
Agility, I'd say. You try a deal, and if the terms stink, you just walk away. If the market shifts, you pivot.
Precisely. In a private business, especially one run like a tightly controlled family empire, you can wake up, have a gut feeling, and completely change the direction of the company by lunch.
Because there are very few stakeholders to check with. You don't have to go through a committee.
Exactly. The source describes his method as act, absorb, adjust.
Let's break that down. Act, absorb, adjust.
So step 1 is act. He puts something out there, usually a raw, totally unfiltered idea. Maybe it's a threat of a new tariff or a sudden withdrawal from a global meeting.
And he often does this on social media, like late at night.
Yes, and that's where everyone gets it wrong. The tweet isn't the final policy.
It's not.
No, the tweet is a trial balloon. It's a beta test.
Ah, okay.
This leads to step 2. Absorb. He watches the public reaction. Do his core supporters cheer? Does the stock market tank? Do the cable news anchors lose their minds?
So he's essentially crowdsourcing the policy in real time.
Essentially, yes.
Oh.
Policies emerge half-formed.
Mm.
And then we get to step 3. Adjust. If the reaction is useful to him, he doubles down. If the leverage shifts or the backlash is just too costly, he pretends he never really meant it, or he pivots to a new position entirely.
Okay, I can see how that works if you're negotiating a hotel deal in Atlantic City. But we're talking about the Oval Office here.
Yeah, the stakes are a bit higher.
A lot higher. This is where I struggle with the whole it's just his style argument, because when you do that as president, you aren't just testing a marketing slogan. You are moving armies. You're affecting global markets. A simple order creates these massive, complex global reverberations.
And that is exactly the friction point the source highlights. That is why the world feels so unstable around him. The operating system that worked brilliantly in private business is catastrophic for traditional diplomacy.
Because diplomacy relies on predictability.
Exactly. Allies need to know that if you sign a piece of paper today, it's still valid tomorrow.
If you're a NATO ally, you can't really beta test a mutual defense treaty.
You really can't. But the text suggests Trump doesn't view the presidency as a distinct, sacred institution with different rules. He views it as just a bigger company.
Wow.
So when he creates that chaos markets crashing, foreign leaders panicking, he doesn't see it as a failure of leadership. He sees it as creating leverage.
So while the State Department is having a collective heart attack trying to clean up the mess,
He's thinking, great, now I have everyone's attention. Now we can negotiate on my terms.
he views the chaos as a feature, not a bug.
Correct. It keeps everyone off balance, which he believes gives him the upper hand. Speed overpowering deliberation.
It's incredibly high risk, though. It feels like playing poker with the global economy.
It is high risk. But again, look at the internal logic. He trusts his own ability to read the room and pivot at the last second more than he trusts a 50-page briefing book from a policy expert.
Speed is his weapon.
Yes, deliberation sitting around a big oak table discussing pros and cons for weeks, that looks like weakness to him.
Which is a perfect bridge to the second trait we need to unpack. Because if his method is act, absorb, adjust, we really need to look at what he is acting on, what drives the agenda in the first place.
Right, and the source calls this the need for an opponent.
This is, in my opinion, the most psychological part of the entire analysis. The research suggests that Trump is fueled by conflict, but not just abstract challenges like improving the economy or fixing roads. He needs a face. He needs a villain.
It's the wrestling logic. You can't just be a good wrestler showing off your moves. You have to have a heel to fight against. The internal fire burns brighter when the enemy is clear.
But it's deeper than just showmanship.
Much deeper.
Yeah.
The source argues that defining an external enemy is a psychological defense mechanism. It's the logic of scapegoating. By projecting threats outward, he avoids the need for internal reform.
Explain that for us. How does picking a fight stop us from having to look in the mirror?
Well, think about it. If you have a massive problem, you really have two choices. You can say, I have bad habits that cause this, and I need to do the hard work to change them.
Which is painful.
Very painful. Or you can point a finger and say, that guy over there did this to me.
That brings immediate relief.
Exactly. It's not my fault. It's his. And the analysis gives us three really concrete examples from his presidency to illustrate this scapegoating mechanic: climate, globalization, and health.
Let's walk through the climate change example first, because this was a huge part of his platform pulling out of the Paris Accord.
Right. Now look at the reality of the situation. Why is climate change a problem? Largely because of developed nations' high consumption habits. We drive big cars, we buy cheap plastic goods, we use a ton of energy.
American carbon emissions are massive.
To fix that reality requires internal change. It requires domestic sacrifice.
And nobody gets elected telling voters, hey, you need to drive less and pay double for your heating bill.
Exactly. That is a guaranteed losing message. So following his internal logic, the target shifts. The enemy isn't our own carbon emissions. The enemy becomes the Paris Accord itself.
He makes the treaty the villain.
He frames the treaty as this unfair foreign shackle designed specifically to hurt America. By fighting the treaty, he gives his supporters a victory. They get to say, we beat the Paris Accord.
Without ever having to actually address the underlying reality of the changing climate.
It's incredibly efficient, politically speaking. You defeat the symbol and you ignore the substance. It provides that psychological relief. You don't have to change your lifestyle at all. You just have to cheer for the guy fighting the bad deal.
Okay, let's look at the second example. Globalization. This feels closely tied to his classic Rust Belt appeal.
It is, but look at the mechanic again. The internal reality is that for 30 years, the U.S. financial system actively incentivized companies to prioritize short-term stock gains.
Right.
Wall Street rewarded companies for moving their production bases to cheaper locations overseas. That was a domestic policy choice. We effectively did that to ourselves to juice the stock market.
But trying to explain corporate incentive structures and quarterly earnings pressure to a massive rally crowd, that's just a snooze fest.
Not to mention, it implicates American business leaders.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He projects the threat outward again. The problem isn't that we moved the factories. The problem is that they stole our jobs.
China is cheating us. Mexico is sending bad people. That kind of rhetoric.
Right. The enemy becomes the abstract concept of globalization itself, or very specific foreign trade partners. It turns a complex structural failure of the U.S. economy into a very simple story of theft.
And if it's theft, you don't need systemic reform. You just need a sheriff to go get your stuff back.
I see the pattern you're talking about. It completely absolves the voter and the country of any responsibility. We didn't lose our competitive edge. It was violently taken from us.
Which leads to the third example from the text, and this is perhaps the most sensitive one: health. Specifically, looking at the COVID-19 pandemic and the World Health Organization.
Oh, I remember this vividly. The pivot to blaming the WHO was almost immediate.
It was. Now think about the pre-existing conditions of the United States. We have an incredibly expensive, often wildly inefficient healthcare system. We have high rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease.
Unhealthy eating habits are systemic here.
Right. So when a virus hits, those internal factors make the impact much, much worse.
But again, those are us problems. Those are messy, systemic American problems.
So following the logic we've established, find the external opponent. The World Health Organization becomes the target. By focusing entirely on their mismanagement or their alleged bias towards China, he creates a battle he can actually fight.
He can withdraw funding from the WHO. He can attack their leaders on Twitter.
Exactly. What he can't do is attack the fact that millions of Americans don't have access to preventative care.
The source puts this in a really compelling way and says, there is relief in having something concrete to confront rather than something internal to reform.
That's a powerful quote.
It really is. It's much easier to fight a dragon outside the castle walls than it is to fix the rotting plumbing inside the castle.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it explains why the conflict just never ends. If he ever stops fighting the external enemy, the focus might naturally turn inward, and that is the one thing his psychological disposition seems desperate to avoid.
Which brings us perfectly to the third, and maybe the most critical trait of this operating system: the absolute aversion to weakness.
Yes. This is the one that I think drives his critics the most crazy. The absolute refusal to ever admit a mistake, even when it's objectively obvious, even when it's just a typo in a tweet.
It goes way beyond normal political stubbornness. Most politicians will spin a mistake, right? They'll say, well, new information came to light, or I misspoke. Trump refuses to admit the premise of error entirely.
Why is that? Is the source just calling it massive ego?
The source actually argues it's deeper than ego. In his internal framework, admitting fault is an existential threat. It's a primal survival instinct.
Explain that connection. How does simply saying I was wrong threaten his survival?
You have to look at his fundamental worldview. He sees the world as a purely binary place. Winners and losers, predators and prey, strength and weakness. If you admit you were wrong, you are signaling weakness.
And in his mind, once you signal weakness, the sharks come.
Exactly. It's a chain reaction. Admitting fault equals exposing weakness. Exposing weakness equals risk of total collapse.
So it's this domino effect. If I apologize for the small thing today, my enemies will use it to destroy me on the big thing tomorrow.
That's why resistance is the only option. Look at how he handles legal setbacks. A normal, traditional response to an unfavorable court verdict is to appeal the legal merits quietly.
What does he do? He attacks the judge. He attacks the court clerk. He attacks the entire legal system as being rigged against him.
Because if the system is rigged, then he didn't actually lose. He was cheated. And if he was cheated, he is still the strong man fighting a corrupt system. He cannot concede because concession is literal death in this framework.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. Living in a state of constant, total warfare where you can never let your guard down, never say my bad.
It is exhausting. But you have to acknowledge the result. It creates this aura of invincibility for his supporters. They see someone who refuses to bow, even when the entire world is pressing down on him.
So we have the speed the act, absorb, adjust cycle. We have the scapegoating, the constant need for external enemies. And we have the strength, the absolute refusal to ever apologize.
Yes.
When you combine these three traits, you get a communication style that is radically different from anything we've seen before in modern politics.
It's night and day. The source draws a sharp comparison to the traditional model of the presidency. Think about past presidents. What happens before they give a major speech?
It's a whole factory process. Speechwriters draft it, policy advisors check it, legal counsel reviews it, PR consultants polish it for emotional resonance.
By the time the president actually says the words, it's been scrubbed of anything remotely risky.
It's calibrated. It's safe. And honestly, it often feels manufactured. It feels like a corporate press release, not a human being talking to you.
Then you have Trump. His communication is described as a direct line from private thought to public platform.
Bypassing the entire PR structure, just him and his phone.
Now, we've discussed the cons of this approach, the abrasive tone, the extreme volatility, but we have to acknowledge the trade-off presented in the text. The source argues that this lack of polish is exactly what conveys authenticity to his base.
It's the no-frills factor. I've heard people say this time and time again. They say, I don't always like how he says it, but at least I know it's really him saying it.
In a world full of focus-grouped plastic politicians, raw aggression feels like truth to a lot of people. It signals that he isn't beholden to this system that polished everyone else.
It reminds me of that Machiavelli quote the source brought up. It feels like the oldest rule in the political playbook.
Yes.
Yeah.
From the Prince. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both.
Do you think he consciously follows that philosophy? Or is it just a natural instinct?
Whether he's read Machiavelli or not, he entirely embodies that specific line. Traditional politicians desperately want to be loved. They obsess over approval ratings. They want to be the consoler-in-chief during a tragedy.
Right.
Trump wants to be respected, and in his vocabulary, respect is equated with fear. He uses a fear-based approach to maintain strength and avoid vulnerability.
He doesn't want to be the nice dad. He wants to be the bodyguard.
Exactly. And to be a bodyguard, you need a threat to protect people from. This connects right back to the scapegoating. If the world is incredibly dangerous and full of cheaters and bad deals, then you don't need a nice, polite leader. You need a monster who is on your side.
So let's try to bring this all together for you listening. We have this profile of a leader who operates on speed, thrives on conflict, and refuses to show vulnerability. The big question everyone always asks is, will he change?
People always ask for the pivot.
Right. If he gets another term, or just as he gets older, will we ever see a pivot to presidential?
The source is pretty blunt on this reality check. The answer is simply no.
Don't hold your breath.
Temperament is rarely something that fundamentally changes in your 70s. But more importantly, from his perspective, why would he change?
Because it causes international chaos.
Remember, we established the chaos works for him.
Mm.
He was elected through a transparent democratic system. He didn't hide these traits from the public. He actively campaigned on them.
That's a fair point.
The voters saw the act absorbed adjust method. They
Okay.
saw the scapegoating of foreign entities. They saw the relentless aggression, and they hired him anyway.
So expecting him to suddenly start acting like a traditional filtered diplomat is basically ignoring the reality of who he is and how he won?
It's a completely futile wish. The source suggests that instead of hoping he magically changes to align with global trends, we need to change how we interpret his actions. We need to stop being dumbfounded.
We need to learn the code.
Right. If you stop expecting a traditional president and start viewing him through this internal logic, his behavior actually becomes much less confusing.
That is a really profound point. If you know that every time a complex domestic issue arises, he will find an external target, then you can almost predict the tweet before he even sends it.
If you know that every threat is just a beta test, you don't panic immediately, you wait to see the reaction.
And if you know he will never apologize, you just stop waiting for the apology.
Exactly.
It brings up a paradox that I want to leave you with today. Something to mull over. We started this deep dive talking about how incredibly unpredictable Donald Trump is, how he keeps the whole world on edge.
Yeah.
But if this analysis is right, if he is running on this strict, repetitive, biological code of speed, scapegoating, and strength, does that actually make him the most predictable leader on the world stage?
It's the ultimate irony. He might actually be the most consistent operator out there, provided you're finally reading from the right manual.
A fascinating way to look at it. It certainly changes how I'm going to read the headlines tomorrow.
It really clarifies the signal through all the noise.
Well, that is a lot to chew on. We hope this deep dive gave you a totally new lens to view the political landscape. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.